Thank you for your generosity. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. This is powerful imagery, and it is one voice of immigration, of leaving home, crossing borders, seeking refuge. In truth, there are as many voices, as many stories of leaving home as there are immigrants. You have your own stories, and your family has stories. Some leave home by choice to explore, to grow, to discover, for work or adventure. Some are forced to leave by violence, by poverty, a lack of opportunity, or food, safety, or shelter. There are stories of those crossing the desert, riding on top of a train, crossing the ocean in a raft, or swimming across Guantanamo Bay. A friend of mine escaped Cuba in the early 90s that way and was granted asylum just by arriving at the immigration detention site and asking for it. That was in the decade before September 11th, 2001, after which Guantanamo was turned into a military prison. People and societies create borders, establish territories, set boundaries, and construct categories. We do it to make sense of the world, but also to manage our fears and provide a sense of control. Borders are created to control resources. In controlling those resources, human beings are dehumanized and turned into criminals. Most of us are sickened by the stories we hear in the news of children separated from their parents with no plan to bring them back together, of those who are not able to leave the mouth of a shark, and those held in detention for trying. There is much that is myth and misinformation about our broken immigration system. Amidst the hatred and fear-mongering that pass for news and truth, it's hard to sort out how we got to this point. When we hear of babies being torn from their mother's breast, it's easy to be outraged and think this is not who we are, or we're better than this. However, as educator, organizer, and writer Brittany Packnett pointed out at the General Assembly Where lecture this summer, this is precisely who we are. I hope and pray that we can change, but we, and I mean the United States of America as well as every imperialist country, have found creative ways to establish otherness, to exploit outsiders, form castes, and perpetuate classism. We, and I mean those who have benefited from those caste systems currently and historically, have allowed our country to determine who belongs, who has a right to be here, and who is deemed illegal. The very construct of illegal immigration, for it is a construct, an idea created, perpetuated, and evolving to serve the purposes of profit and domination. The very idea flies in the face of the U.S. Constitution, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and our first principle affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Human rights are violated when a powerful few get to decide who belongs where, and when corporations determine the value of life and the minimum of wages. When basic human rights are denied, it may seem that those with rights intact can ignore the problem, but when one person or group is denied their basic humanity, the humanity of each of us is lessened. U.S. immigration policy is and always has been intentionally and undeniably driven by racism. This is not new. White supremacy has been at every turn of our nation's development. It is currently revitalized, emboldened, and empowered, but in no way is it new. And it's not owned by one political party. More immigrants were deported under President Obama than any other president before him. In 1790, the Naturalization Act granted citizenship to white males of good moral character, whatever that means. and explicitly denied the rights of citizenship to Native Americans, Chinese, and Africans captured and enslaved. This country has always denied rights, excluded and marginalized, treated people as less than human based on race, through the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and the Immigration Act of 1891, to name just a few. And business has always found a way to profit from such a system, to exploit cheap labor through racist means and deny rights and legal protection for workers. Dehumanizing and criminalizing people, creating a false narrative of danger and injustice have all worked well. The misinformation about immigrants and immigration is intentional and effective. Aviva Chomsky, history professor and daughter of famed social critic and philosopher Noam Chomsky, unravels the myths of immigration in her book, They Take Our Jobs, and 20 other myths about immigration. That first myth that Chomsky explores, that immigrants take American jobs, she explains that the unemployment rate in the United States has fluctuated independently of immigration rates. There's no shown correlation between the two. And in fact, immigrant workers, like all workers, are also consumers and therefore create jobs at the same time that they are working. Aside from that, immigrant workers pay taxes at the same rates as those born in the United States without having the same rights or wages. Immigrants do often fill lower paying jobs, which brings us to the second myth Chomsky examines. Immigrants compete with low-skilled workers and drive down wages. Actually, the truth is they do compete for jobs, but rather than this being the driver of low wages, this is the intended result of corporations that benefit from a high-profit, cheap product model. Chomsky writes, "The reason this competition exists is because too many people are deprived of rights. For centuries, the United States and other industrialized countries have institutionalized inequalities by granting rights to some people, but not to others. People without rights may be slaves, they may be colonial subjects, they may be racial and ethnic minorities, or they may be immigrants. In all cases, though, governments have made sure that there are people without rights to fulfill businesses' need for cheap workers and high profits. When one group of workers has gained rights historically, businesses with government help have simply looked elsewhere to define or create a new group of rightless workers." End quote. For example, in 1942, the Braceros program, which translated means arms, was created to grant temporary visas and encourage farm workers from Mexico to work for low wages, without protections or regulated conditions. The program provided a tremendous profit margin for wealthy corporations. Then, in 1965, when the quota system was established to limit the number of immigrants from Mexico and other non-European countries, these legal, albeit exploited workers were targeted and deported, turning legal migrant workers into illegals. Just as the war on drugs has criminalized African Americans living in poverty by changing the laws, enforcement, and prosecution of nonviolent drug crimes, which trap them in a corrupt prison system with no escape, the United States has encouraged the use of cheap migrant labor and then deemed them criminals. Intentionally and systematically stripping workers of their rights based on race and country of origin brings us to the third myth, that unions oppose immigration because it harms the working class. The American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, both before and after their merger in 1955 to the AFL-CIO, we know today, were unapologetically racist. It's in their documentation, it's in speeches they've said and things they've written. But these union organizations, they supported the restrictions to immigration, which were from inception very much based on race. However, in 1993, the AFL-CIO adopted a resolution recognizing that immigrants had been falsely blamed for the nation's economic troubles, and the labor organization committed itself to promoting immigrant worker rights. In fact, they've united with immigrant rights organizations to speak out against family separations, to advocate for increasing the minimum wage and adopting universal health care, because improving the rights and welfare of all workers is the best way to promote national prosperity. These are just a few of the myths about immigrants and immigration which undermine our democracy and betray our Unitarian Universalist values. They are the tools of those who profit from a cheap labor force turning against itself, divide and conquer at work yet again. Each day we can see how easy it is to perpetuate lies that cast blame and separate people into those deserving and those unworthy of basic needs. Ignorance is easy to feed. Myths arise from fears fed for profit. We have to work a little harder for truth. The truth emerges from stories shared in genuine relationship. Equity and compassion, aspirations of our second principle, come to be when we meet across perceived differences, listen to one another's stories, and hold another's liberation as equally valuable and intimately tied to our own. This work takes time. Dismantling a broken immigration system which has profited those in power won't happen all at once or easily. It will begin with unraveling those myths, listening to the stories of those who come here, and building relationships of trust and solidarity. Last December, this congregation joined other houses of worship to adopt the Evanston Sanctuary Community Resolution. It was originally written by members of Beth Emmet at the encouragement of the Interfaith Clergy Group, and we reviewed, discussed, and modified it to best fit our intentions. Through it, we resolved as a congregation to take actions consistent with the values and resources of our community to oppose xenophobia and to protect undocumented immigrants from deportation and the hardships such deportation will cause them and their families. Since then, a team has formed, which was the first action item of that resolution, to explore ways that we can accountably be in solidarity with those who are threatened and marginalized in our community. The team is the Immigrant Solidarity Team, and many of them are here today, lit our chalice. It consists of Sally Parsons and Joe Romeo as co-leads, David Bates Jeffries, Maggie and Dennis Wilson. Maggie, by the way, made our butterfly that is the symbol of migration and helps us celebrate today. Michelle Novak, Kate Poole, Marjorie Rogasner, Lee Banner, and Janelle Britton. Since forming this team, and individuals from the team have begun to build relationships with organizations addressing the needs of those without documentation and determining how best we can be of use. Some have helped with the website of our Shared Plate organization, ICDI. Some of us have worked with members of St. Nick's Catholic Church to assist people released from ICE detention, providing transportation to family and friends. One member has provided support for a refugee family from Nigeria. Another provided a room for a night to a mom separated from her daughter at the border by ICE. She was on her way from Arizona to be reunited with her daughter in New York City. We've shown the movie Indivisible twice about DACA recipients who have been separated from their families in perpetual limbo. We've hosted a presentation by Melanie Shikori of ICDI and supported Know Your Rights and Upstander trainings. We've participated in Solidarity Response Team activities through Evanston for All and attended marches and rallies. The team has explored relationships with organizations such as Communities United, Centro Romero, Evanston Refugee Roundtable, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, Protect Rogers Park, Immigrant Families Together, Open Communities, and the Evanston Task Force on Immigration. Looking forward, we're planning to offer a conversational Spanish class here to expand our capacity to be in solidarity with Spanish-speaking people and communities. Kate Poole will be in the back with a sign-up sheet if you're interested in that. The Solidarity Response Team of Evanston for All is also sponsoring a storytelling event on September 30th at Grace Lutheran Church featuring Latinx and Hispanic perspectives, including stories of those in our community who have been separated from family members held in detention. And team members are identifying a panelist for a play and discussion in November regarding issues related to immigrant families living in America. These are just a few of the things that we're up to. As you can see, we have been busy, and we continue to seek ways of showing up and taking action, of resisting the narratives of exclusion and fear and hate. There will be information at the back tables, lots of it, about ways that you can participate. UUA President Reverend Susan Frederick Gray wrote in the most recent issue of the UU World, "The particular context we are living in challenges each of us to ask, what acts will we take each day to not comply with these growing practices of dehumanization and violence? For whenever we practice cruelty against another or are complicit in such practices, we undermine our own humanity, our own capacity for kindness and compassion. Our faith calls us to respond in some way to the myth that humans are illegal, or that one group has the right to tell another where they can live and thrive. It is overwhelming to figure out how best to resist. But we can all be a part of expanding the narratives of hope, of possibility, of human rights, and human dignity. We can celebrate the stories of bravely crossing borders, of escaping sharks, of staying together in solidarity to survive. A sanctuary is more than a place to worship or a temporary home for those who are escaping danger. Being a sanctuary community means building a network of care, demanding human rights, celebrating difference, and centering those who are marginalized. It also means recognizing that each of us has a story of home, of leaving home, or coming home. You and your family have a story. Building relationships of trust and compassion means sharing your stories too. What is your story? I'd like to ask you, if you're willing, to raise your hand if your grandparents came from another country to this one. Raise your hand. And keep them raised and look around. And now, how many of you, keep them up. Keep them up. And how many of you, I'm sorry, your blood is going to drain out of your arms. How many of you have had parents that have come from another country to this country? Look around. And how many of you yourselves have come from another country? Yes, you may stand if you are willing and able. Yes. Yes. So you can see, and if we went back further and further, mine's great-grandparents on both sides have come from another country. If we went back further enough, everyone's hand would be raised in this room. We are all immigrants. Think of those places and those people in your family and the stories of those who came here from other places. And I ask you one more thing. If you would say the names of those places and those people into this room so that we can hold those stories in love and appreciation and see the humanity in each one of them. Speak those names in this room. I invite you to tell each other those stories after the service and in the weeks and days and years to come. Each of us is called to cross borders in our hearts and minds to dismantle the walls of false separation, We are each responsible for upholding the worth and dignity of every other person. We can't dismantle the systems of oppression alone. None of us has the power by ourselves to fix our broken immigration system, but we can search for the truth of abuse of power in that system, and we can help create spaces where silenced voices can emerge. We can ask about the mouth of a shark. We can offer to hold a hand and affirm you are a person with rights worth fighting for. We can vote to reflect not just our interests, but the interests of those who are not represented. We can spend our money to support fair trade and tell the businesses that we frequent that we want fair wages and treatment for all workers. We can write or call our legislators. Face one another not in fear, but in dignity, love, and honesty. Know that borders are illusion and separation is the tool of oppression. Be brave in crossing borders, in leaving the tidy, safe homes of your hearts. Reach out for those escaping into your company. May we each expand the borders of our souls and minds to make this world a peaceful home for all. May it be so. May we make it so.